good. Good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahaye Tejasvina Vadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahaihi. Om Shanti 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 Chaitanyam Sarvagam Sarvam Sarvagu Ashayam Yat Sarva Vishayatitam Tasmai Sadhagvide Namaha. Oh, very good. Welcome to you. Where are you? There you are. Welcome to you all. And of course, welcome to the many students who attend these classes online. We continue our study of Shankara's brilliant text, Upadesha Sahasri. And today we have a sequence of classes, a sequence of verses, actually not. We have one verse and then that sequence, so let me hold off on those comments. Where we left off was a discussion of Atma as avastha traya sakshi. This is one of the Sanskrit terms that are worth knowing. Avastha, state or condition, referring to a condition of the mind. Avastha traya, three states of the mind: waking, dream, sleep. Sakshi, the awareful witness. And when we use the word witness, Sakshi, the implication is the Sakshi is not involved. If there's a crime scene, and we use this word Sakshi. In fact, in Hindi, I think Sakshi is used for the witness at a trial, which I find very amusing, but anyway. The witness of a crime didn't participate in the crime, right? Non-participant is the point of the word Sakshi. So Sakshi then, with regard to the activities of your mind, just to say witness, we specifically have to say the uninvolved witness. The so-called distant witness, and the term I've used so many times, and Shankara has used many times, very important term, unchanging witness. Very crucial point. And that's our subject matter currently, and Shankara in this next verse, where are we? Here. In this next verse continues with that analysis. By the way, if any of you are using these handouts, the handouts on our website have been updated. I think the prior set of handouts ended with the previous verse. A complete set of handouts are available. Nice to take notes if you want. So let us continue. Tatraivam sati buddhirgnya, tatraivam sati buddhirgnya, atma-bhasava-bhasayan, atma-bhasatma-bhasayan, karta-ta-samyarartasta, karta-ta-samyarartasta, mudharhevabhidhiyate, mudharhevabhidhiyate. Tatra evam sati, that being so, with reference to the prior verse about Atma being the unchanging, uninvolved observer of whatever happens in your mind during the waking, dream, and deep sleep states. Remember I gave that theater example? I find that's a very useful example that I called a double feature movie at the end of the last class. So you're sitting in the theater, you watch the activities of the movie, you feel like you're involved, but you're not truly involved. That's the point. Okay, so here he says now, talking about the jnana, end of the first line. Jnana means knower, in this case means that sakshi, that unchanging consciousness. That unconsciousness, atma, bhasa, avabhasayan. That conscious observer, sakshi, avabhasayan, illumining how? Atma, bhasa, by the light of Atma. I just want to remind you that when we say Atma is like light, please don't forget it's a metaphor. And metaphors are never equivalent to the actual thing. Don't think there's something in your light, in your head, shining and illuminating things. It's a metaphor. And we'll come back to this. It's quite important. So, this jnana, that sakshi, that witness, illumining through its own light, illumining what? Buddhihi. For our Sanskrit students, feminine accusative plural. Buddhihi. Illumining and here buddhi means vritti, activities, the activities of your mind. So that unchanging consciousness illumining the activities of your mind. What about it? Drop down to the last line. Mudhaihi, by the ignorant ones, eva, alone, only ignorant people, abhidhiyate, consider that unchanging consciousness to be the karta, third line, to be the maker tasam of those vrittis, to be the creator of those vrittis, to be the producer of those vrittis. We said uninvolved. Did the witness cause the crime to take place? No, the crime just took place on its own. The witness just happened to be standing there. So this is a crucial question. Does consciousness create your thoughts? And at a surface level, yeah, I think so. Well, does the witness cause a crime? Come on. We have to understand unchanging means it can't do anything. Remember Puja Swamiji's joke, Atma is good for nothing. It doesn't do anything. To produce a vritti, to create a vritti is an action, which would then make consciousness a karta, an agent of action. But not understanding all this properly, mudhaihi, due to ignorance, people think that Atma is the tasam karta. Tasam refers to those mental activities. Atma is the maker of mental activities. Not. Atma is the revealer of mental activities. Those mental activities which are yadartha, taha. Taha, those mental activities are yadartha. They are objects known to consciousness. Just as the crime is a scene observed by the uninvolved witness, in exactly the same way, the activities of your mind are revealed, not produced, revealed by unchanging consciousness. And here's our favorite metaphor. If you say, but Swamiji, let me introduce this, but Swamiji, aren't vrittis, didn't you say vrittis are consciousness with a name and form? The content of every vritti is consciousness. We've had this discussion many times. Vrittis are consciousness. Consciousness is not vritti. Why? Because consciousness is without an upadhi. And in fact, upadhi is our major topic, starting with the next verse. Let's hold off on that. Did clay create this pot? Of course, clay is crucial. Without clay, there would be no pot. But clay didn't create this pot. There's another factor involved. We'll call him a potter, kulala, in Sanskrit. So the clay itself does not produce the pot. You get the point? Consciousness itself does not produce vrittis. Your mind produces vrittis. Consciousness itself doesn't produce vrittis, just as clay doesn't produce pot. Okay. Now, starting with the next verse, we have a series of 3 verses discussing one of the crucial topics in Advaita Vedanta, and that is the concept of anupadhi. And I want to define very carefully what is upadhi, but let's see the verse first, and then we'll continue with that. Sarvagnya pyata heva syat, sarvagnyo pyata heva syat, swena bhasava bhasayan, swena bhasava bhasayan, sarvam sarva kriya hetoho, sarvam sarva kriya hetoho, sarva kritvam tatatmanaha, sarva kritvam tatatmanaha. These verses are easy to understand if you really get what is a upadhi. And I'm going to give a more scholarly definition of upadhi today. It may sound technical at first or philosophical at first, but if you get it, it is so brilliant and clear and helpful. So I've always, in the past, I usually use this crystal as an example. And I say the cloth is an upadhi for the crystal. The cloth makes the crystal look as other than it truly is. You've heard this many times. Let me share with you today this more scholarly truth. This is how commentators would explain it. They use this metaphor, of course, but this is the way they would explain it, by understanding the difference between an adjective and an upadhi. Adjective in Sanskrit, visheshana. Visheshana is Sanskrit term for adjective. Upadhi, as I said before, is really untranslatable in English. We call it, loosely speaking, conditioning adjunct. So the cloth is a conditioning adjunct, which makes the crystal appear as other than what it truly is. Upadhi, his body is an upadhi. It's a conditioning adjunct in that it makes atma seem as other than what it truly is. Now, that's our convention. That's the definition of upadhi we've used in many, many prior classes. This definition I don't think I've given in this current series of classes. We've used it long ago, but let's use it now. To look at it in more scholarly terms, grammar is certainly very scholarly, and the writers of these commentators were great scholars of Sanskrit as well, so not surprising that they would use a grammatical analysis by understanding the difference between adjective and upadhi. That sounds complicated, but wait till you hear their example, which is so simple. Suppose you say, I live in that white house. Okay. White is an adjective. There are many other houses. How do you know which house? The one that's white. The others are brown, blue, yellow, etc. I live in that white house. So white is an adjective. It describes the nature of the house. But suppose instead of white house, you say, I live in that house with the black crow on it. Now, black crow, it still informs you which house. There's a black crow only on one house, It happens to be on the house that's painted white, but notice how different that description is. Because black crow is extrinsic as opposed to the whiteness of the house, which is intrinsic. Whiteness belongs to the house. Black crow has got nothing to do with the house. It just happens to be standing there on top of the house. So you could very clearly, the whiteness of the house belongs to the house. The blackness of the crow belongs to the crow. But the whiteness of the house belongs to the house. And the crow itself doesn't belong to the house. It is external. That's the term adjunct. Conditioning means you use it to determine which house you're referring to. So that black crow is an upadhi, a conditioning adjunct. It helps you identify the house, discerning the house from other houses, but with reference to something which is an adjunct. Of course, as you know very well, the crow flies off, and there you lose that way of distinguishing the house. Now, that's the grammar of it. You get the concept, and this is how the scholars explain it. Now, what is its relevance to us in atma-vichara, self-inquiry? When we say, we'll talk about this body, and we'll call this body, actually we'll call this body white. It looks pretty white. All right. Which I just have to make this observation. When once when I was in India for about half a year, I looked at why am I so white? It looked really strange to me. Anyway, that's completely beside the point. Anyway, so watch this. If I say I am white, I'm referring to an adjective that belongs to the body. And remember, the white house, the house is really white. But when I say I am white, I am not, I, sat-chit-ananda atma, am not really white. So to use the expression I am white in that sentence, white is an adjective, right? A predicate, but don't worry about the grammar. White is an adjective. It's an adjective that describes me, and that's a problem because whiteness, just as the whiteness of the house belongs to the house, the whiteness of the body belongs to the body. So suppose instead of saying I am white, using white as an adjective, suppose we turn that white into an upadhi, like the black crow. There is a black crow present. There is a white body that's present. A black crow is present in my experience. A white body is present in my experience. There is whiteness, but the whiteness, our usual way of describing this is to say the whiteness belongs to the body. So that's whiteness as an adjective. But now we're going to say, suppose you take whiteness as an upadhi, like the blackness of the crow, which means, and look at the difference, is the crow, what has the crow got to do with the house? That's the point. The whiteness of the house is very closely associated, but blackness of the crow itself, has no real intrinsic connection whatsoever to the house. So this may sound a little more complicated way of describing upadhi, and I suppose it is, but it's a more technical description. It's more accurate, and it allows us to make the following statement, which we'll explain with the next 3 verses. And I'm not sure if I heard Swami Paramarthananda teach this. I think so, because I don't remember my guru teaching this. The expression used was, the process of Vedanta is a process of converting adjectives into upadhis. Now that sounds about as abstract as anything. What do you mean, converting adjectives into upadhis? So converting the white is an adjective. I am white is an adjective. Suppose we convert it into an upadhi, like the black crow. The black crow just happens to be there. This white body just happens to be sitting in this chair. What has it got to do with consciousness? What has the black crow got to do with the house? Nothing. What does the white body have to do with consciousness? Nothing. This is Shankara's main topic through much of this chapter, is showing how Atma is asanga, unconnected, uninvolved, untouched. So this is our topic. So we're taking a very different approach to upadhi today. Let's go through these 3 verses and we'll see the application of this teaching. And I think if it's not very clear yet, it'll become more clear as we see these verses. So first he gives 2 examples of upadhi in this next verse. Start in the second line. Swena bhasa avabhasayan, illumining, referring to Atma. Atma avabhasa, same term used in the prior verse. Atma, which is swena, by its own, bhasa, by its own light, avabhasayan, illumining everything. We've discussed before how consciousness isn't stuck inside your head, has no edge, no boundary. So consciousness illumines not just your vrittis, the same consciousness illumines my vrittis and the vrittis of a cockroach. If a cockroach has vrittis, they are illumined by the same consciousness. But based on this fact, and here's Shankara's point here, sarvagnaha ataha eva syat. Atma eva syat, Atma is considered sarvagnaha, all-knowing. Now, what is Shankara saying here? We say Atma, one consciousness illumines the activities of every mind. And then we use an adjective, sarvagnaha. Atma is all-knowing. And of course that word has all kinds of funny connotations, but it's appropriate here. Atma is all-knowing. Why? Because it illumines all minds. But Shankara's point here is that the word sarvagna is an adjective, but should be considered an upadhi. And I'm listening to this as if I'm sitting here, and it sounds really confusing. I get that. So what am I saying here? What is Shankara teaching us here? Let me just set this whole thing aside and just use some very simple, direct language. Atma is not sarvagna. Atma, in fact, more fundamentally, Atma doesn't illumine anything. Huh? That seems absolutely contrary to everything we've just discussed. What do you mean Atma doesn't illumine? Illumine is a verb, right? Verbs are words of action. Atma is shining, 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 shining. We've said how many times Atma doesn't do anything. Atma doesn't shine. Atma doesn't illumine. And then, of course, this also brings up the common question of Swamiji: if Atma shines, illumines the thoughts in my mind, doesn't that make duality? That's why I said at the beginning of the class, it's a metaphor. Atma doesn't shine. We use shining as a metaphor to help better understand the relationship between consciousness and mind. So Atma doesn't shine. I bore you with more actually, no more grammar. We've got enough grammar going on here. So Atma doesn't shine in the sense that shining is an action. Illumining is an action. This light shines. This light spits out photons which bounce off of me. Actually, a few of them don't bounce off of me. They stick to me and they warm me up. Not much, but that's how light works. Some of the photons get absorbed. Those photons warm me. Now I'm going from grammar to science. Gosh. I thought I should be teaching Vedanta today. Okay, let's get back on track here. The light is, even though it looks like nothing's happening, there's an action happening. The light is emitting, the light bulb is emitting photons. Those photons travel and bounce off me, and that's why you see me. And with that in mind, Atma does not illumine in that sense. It is a metaphor. So to say Atma shines, to say Atma is shining, the word shining is an adjective, but we should understand it as an upadhi, like the crow, in the sense that shining is not essential to Atma. It is an adjunct to Atma. An adjunct means when Atma reveals the activities of your mind, when Atma reveals the activities of all minds, as Shankara refers to here, then we call Atma sarvagnya, all-knowing. All-knowing is an adjective. Atma doesn't possess that adjective. The house is white. The house possesses whiteness. Atma does not possess the quality of being all-knowing. Why? Because for at least two big reasons. One is knowing is another verb, right? It implies an action. Atma doesn't do anything, so Atma can't know anything. Second reason knowing, I'm back to grammar, knowing and illumining are transitive verbs. They have objects. Atma knows something. Light shines on something. Duality. We have to transcend this duality. Okay, I know that's a little bit obscure, but we'll see another example here. In fact, an even little better example, in the better meaning more simple, more accessible example in the second half, where Shankara says, sarvam, sarva vikriya hetoho, sarva kartritvam tata atmanaha. I'm stuck on grammar. I always look do a grammatical analysis when I read something. Sarva kriya hetoho. Atma is considered the hetu, the cause, for the kriya, activities of sarva, of all things. Atma causes the activity of all things. Therefore, Atma is considered tata in the same way. Atma is considered sarvakartritvam. Atma is considered to have the status of being the doer of all, the sentiency that makes beings conscious. The sentiency that, I'm going to turn it around. The consciousness that makes beings living, acting, sentient things. Not. And this is the challenging thing. On the surface, it sounds right. Because you are a conscious being, therefore you can walk and talk and think and do all of these things. On the surface, that sounds fine. Do you think about it a little bit? Shankara obviously has thought about it a lot. And here's the problem. Let me share with you a metaphor that's often, in fact, a number of metaphors that's often used. We already said before, consciousness doesn't produce your thoughts. Does consciousness produce your actions? Again, consciousness producing your thoughts on the surface seems okay. On analysis, not at all. Same thing. On the surface, of course, I walk and talk because I'm a conscious being. No. Why? Why do we say no? Consciousness is good for nothing. Consciousness doesn't do anything. But now in a more technical, actually not a more technical sense, let me give you some metaphors. The metaphor given actually by Shankara himself, he gives a metaphor of when you have to go back in ancient times, when the sun is down, middle of the night, all the farmers are asleep. When the sun comes up, all the farmers are in the field working. Therefore, the sun makes the farmers work. What? But that's the idea. The sun shines and the farmers work. Therefore, the sun shining makes the farmers work. No, the farmers work in the presence of the sun. The sun doesn't make them work. In the same way, your actions take place in the presence of consciousness, but consciousness doesn't make your body, your mind, etc., work or do anything. Consciousness doesn't impel actions. The sun didn't impel the activities of the farmers, but in the presence of the sun they work. So this is Shankara's example. Another example is given by Vidyaranya in his famous Panchadashi text. And in ancient times, if you went to a performance of Kalidasa drama, in the evening, the stage would be illumined by one or more oil lamps. When the lamps are shining, then the actors come out on the stage and perform. Did the lamps make the actors come out and perform? In the presence of the lamps, the actors perform. Doesn't mean the lights made them do anything. This is, again, the metaphor. Consciousness doesn't produce actions. Consciousness doesn't make your mind do anything. Consciousness doesn't make your body do anything. I'll give you two more metaphors. There's another metaphor given by the commentator of this text, some Ramakrishna. The metaphor he gives is this, actually in modern language, they used to call it lodestone magnet. You put a magnet near this is his metaphor, which is, I have to tell you, not a great metaphor. You put a magnet near a nail, for example, and the magnet draws the nail. What did the magnet do? It just It didn't do anything. The nail moves in the presence of the magnet, but the magnet doesn't do anything. So that's the third example. I'll give you one more, since this is a subtle thing. And this is actually, I guess, I won't say my invention, but I like to use this. And that is electricity in a computer. Your computer does things, right? Only when it's plugged in or when the batteries are charged. But the question is, does the electricity make the computer do anything? If all it took was electricity, then you don't need memory chips, you don't need software, all you need is electricity, right? No. So electricity doesn't make your computer do anything, but in the presence of electricity, the computer works. So these are all examples to I guess the modern word is deconstruct our use of this metaphor. Atma shines, Atma illumines, Atma lends sentiency to the body and mind. These are all metaphors. Atma, by its nature, Atma doesn't have to do anything. Atma just is. But due to the nature of Atma, amazing things happen. Like due to the nature of electricity, amazing things happen in your computer. But the electricity doesn't do anything. In the same way, due to the presence of consciousness, amazing things happen in your experience. But consciousness itself doesn't do anything. Okay, now we continue. Sopadishchaiva matmukto, sopadishchaiva matmukto, nirupakyo nupadikaha, nirupakyo upadikaha, nishkalo nirguna shuddhas, nishkalo nirguna shuddhas, Dhammano vakchanapnutaha, Dhammano vakchanapnutaha. Sa upadikaha cha evam atma uktaha. Breaking the words apart for you. Atma uktaha. So far, Atma has been described evam, thus. How has Atma been described so far? Sa upadihi. That sa means with. And when you have sa plus u, it becomes so. So sopadihi means with an upadi. So in the prior verse, we've talked about Atma with an upadi. Atma in the presence of minds, Atma in the presence of bodies, Atma in the presence of things to be illumined or things that act. These are upadhis for Atma. And so far we've discussed Atma in terms of upadhi. Based on these upadhis, we can say that Atma is sarvajnaha, the term Shankara used in the prior verse. Atma is all-knowing. And Atma has sarvakartatvam. Atma is the impeller of all activities. And both of these are wrong statements. Atma is not all-knowing. Atma doesn't impel any activities. These are descriptions of Atma from the perspective of adjuncts, from the perspective of the upadhi, like the house with the black crow. The black crow has nothing to do with the house. In the same way, these terms, sarvajnaha and sarvakartatvam. But now, what about anupadikaha? What about Atma without upadis. Well, we've got a problem. Atma, which is upadikaha, Atma, which is free from upadis, these adjuncts, that Atma happens to be nirupakyaha, undescribable, or indescribable, I think is better English. You can't describe it because we describe Atma in terms of its relationship with other things. So Atma illumines the thoughts and the activities of your mind. Okay, but the activities of your mind are like the black crow, get rid of them. Now describe Atma. You see where we're going with this? If you say Atma is that which illumines, this is my own language. Many, many, many times I've opened the class by saying, whatever is happening in your mind right now is known to you because of consciousness, which is experientially correct, technically incorrect. Consciousness should be understood as it is in and of itself and shouldn't be understood according to upadhis. Look at the problem. The house with the black crow on it. The black crow flew away 20 minutes ago. How is that description helpful? It's technically it's incorrect, right? It was correct at one point, but ultimately it's incorrect to define that house in terms of an upadhi. In the same way, it's not incorrect, it's not fully correct to describe Atma as the illuminer of your thoughts, because that is Atma with reference to anatma. So suppose let's try to define Atma without reference to anything else. This is very abstract, but let's just play with this just for a moment. What would you say? Atma, define for me what is Atma without reference to anything else. The most you can say is Atma is, or even better, I am Atma. Notice, no adjectives. The moment you say Atma is illuminer, Atma is all-pervasive, Atma is all-pervasive, that has a reference to space. Atma is boundaryless, is with regard to boundaries. Atma is all-knowing, is with regard to minds. Atma is untouched by human suffering, is with reference to human suffering. Atma is qualityless, is with regard to qualities. So define Atma without reference to anything else. Nirupakyaha, indescribable. Why? Because Atma is nishkalaha. It has no parts, no aspects. Atma is nirgunaha, as we've just discussed. There are no qualities. Atma is adjectiveless. How's that for an obscure definition? Atma has no adjectives. It is shuddha. Shuddha, pure, means nothing else, right? Pure water means water and nothing else. Atma is consciousness and nothing else, shuddha. And then he concludes here with a reference to the Taittiriya Upanishad. Tam manaha vaksha na apnutaha. Manas and vak, mind and words, na apnutaha, are not able to grasp tam, that Atma. Mind and thoughts, mind and words cannot grasp that thought, that Atma. Why? Sorry, we just have to use a little bit more grammar. Adjectives belong to objects, right? Adjectives belong to objects. If you have no objects, you have no adjectives. How do you describe an object in terms of adjectives? How do you describe any object? Adjectives. How do you describe this object? Not my hand. The absence of anything in my hand. How do you describe that one? Well, you can't, because you can, adjectives, you can't say, is this non-pot, is it heavy or light? Doesn't make any sense. Non-pot is not an object. Therefore, that which is not an object doesn't have adjectives, can't be described. Consciousness, as you've heard a zillion times, is not an object. Subject, you. You are not a thing. Plenty of things outside. You are not one of those things. You are not one of many things. You are unique as consciousness. Consciousness is a subject, not an object. Objects can be described with adjectives. Objects have adjectives. Subjects have no adjectives. You can't say Atma is happy or sad. You can't say Atma is all-pervasive. All-pervasive is an adjective. You can't say Atma is shining. Shining. Actually, it's used here as an adjective. Atma doesn't have adjectives. It just is. And this point is now concluded in this next verse. Chetano, chetano vapi, chetano, chetano vapi, karta, karta, gato, gataha, karta, karta, gato, gataha, baddho muktastatha chaiko, baddho muktastatha chaiko, naika shuddho nyateti va, naika shuddhopi. Good. Chaitana and achetana. These are adjectives. Sentient and insentient. Is consciousness sentient or insentient? Now, I know that word. Vasanti reminds me all the time that no one knows what this word sentience is not a commonly used word. You should note this is an important word. Sentiency is, you look it up in a dictionary, the ability to know, ability to experience, ability to perceive. These are definitions of sentience. Ability to know what? Other stuff. Perceive what? Other stuff. Experience what? Other stuff. Obviously, Atma is not achetana, but you can't even say Atma is Chaitana, because that means it knows something. And that's not a definition of, that's like, we're back to the black crow. The house is not the house with the black crow on it. That's not an appropriate definition of the house. So give it up. Atma is not Chaitana. These are adjectives. And as we said in the prior verse, adjectives are good for describing objects. This object is achaitana. This object is Chaitana. Excellent. Adjectives are very useful. We couldn't function in life without adjectives. But these adjectives modify objects, describe objects, qualify objects. Atma is not an object. Shankara goes on. Karta, akarta. Is Atma a doer or a non-doer. And again, adjectives. You can say the Atma doesn't do anything, but doing is with reference to actions. Actions are something other than Atma. So here again, you're trying to define Atma like defining the house in terms of the black crow. Give it up. These are adjectives. Whether or not Atma is a doer or a non-doer, an agent or a non-agent, these are adjectives. Adjectives are not helpful. By the way, I made reference in the last line of the prior verse that it is beyond the mind and speech. This is a famous statement from the Taittiriya Upanishad. We're going to see it actually again in our next class, so I'll hold off on that further. But you've heard this expression, that which lies beyond the grasp of the mind and words, or that from which the mind and words fall back, having failed to grasp. That's a paraphrase of that famous statement in the Taittiriya Upanishad. Failing to grasp why? Now you get it. Atma is not an object out there that you can grasp. Adjectives belong to objects. If there's no object called Atma out there, then that Atma has no adjectives, like doer or non-doer, agent or non-agent. Gataha, agataha. Atma is moving, Atma is unmoving. More adjectives. Give it up. Baddha, oh, this is very profound. We use terms like baddha and mukta. Baddha, bound. Mukta, liberated. And we've had this discussion before. Atma doesn't get liberated because Atma was never bound. Atma is neither bound nor liberated. These are adjectives. We can use the adjectives to refer to an object like a jiva. We cannot use these adjectives to describe consciousness. And tata ekaha anekaha. Atma is eka, one, or aneka, many. Yeah, Atma is one, right? Well, the very word one implies numbers. Notice we call this Advaita Vedanta. We don't call this Eka Vedanta. Advaita, not two. Very, very interesting choice of words, not two. Because when you say one, then there must be another, and another, and another, and another. So we're talking about that which is numberless. Eka and aneka, one or many, are in the realm of numbers. We're talking about that which is numberless. Also, one and many are adjectives. Adjectives are good for objects. There is one pot. Helpful. But there is one Atma. Again, on the surface it sounds fine. And we use this language all the time. But the language is the big topic we won't get into here at the end of the class. But remember, we use words not to reveal consciousness. Words can reveal objects. Words can describe objects. Well, then how are we using language here? We're admitting all of these adjectives don't work. Let's just finish the verse, otherwise I'll forget it. Shuddha and anyatava. Atma is shuddha, pure, which means nothing else, or anyata. Atma is otherwise. Anyata iti. Atma is pure, Atma is otherwise, with reference to other things other than Atma. To say Atma is pure means atma is free from something else. So you've already introduced something else. So all of these adjectives ultimately have to be given up. And this is a very lofty teaching. Then here's the final point for today's class. Then why do we bother using these adjectives? And let's take I think the most obvious one. Atma illumines the activities of your mind. I said at the outset, that's a metaphor. Metaphors are not meant to be taken as the absolute truth. But then why do we use that language? Suppose I say, Atma doesn't illumine. Suppose you come to class, the first class you come to, and I tell you Atma doesn't do anything. Atma doesn't illumine the contents of your mind. Atma is you. Atma was never bound, never liberated. Now go home. How does that help? That brings us to this really important observation about the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, which you've heard me say before, and that is, these teachings these teachings are not intended to convey information. There's a lot of information here, but that's not the intent. Conveying information is not the intent. The intent of these teachings is to remove wrong conclusions you have made about your own true nature. Consciousness is you. You are this consciousness. You don't need adjectives. In fact, any adjective you come up with will describe something other than you. Right? So, maybe that phone can be turned off. A little distracting. So, this, just to wrap up that thought, best to understand the teachings of Vedanta as a method, a methodology. And the metaphor we've used here before is like stepping stones to get across a pond. The first stepping stone is Atma illumines the activities of your mind. But then when you go to the next stepping stone, you give up the first one. Right? You can't, if you just stay stuck on that first stepping stone, then you don't make progress. On the other hand, if you don't make use of that first stepping stone, you also don't make progress. This is what we mean when we say Atma doesn't convey information. Atma is a method meant to lead you to discover who you truly are. And this idea of stepping stone to stepping stone, some of you remember this Arundhati Darshana Nyaya, going from star to star. I don't want to repeat that whole thing right now, but that's how Vedanta works. It's a process of assertion and negation. Assertion and negation. Adhyaropa and apavada. Assertion and negation. Atma illumines your thoughts. No, it doesn't. Atma is all pervasive. No, it's not. Honestly, that's how these teachings work. Because ultimately, yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasa saha, ultimately Atma is beyond words, yet we're stuck using words. So how do we do that? Again, assertion, negation, assertion, negation. It's just brilliant. Okay, that's a good place to stop for today. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavit, asato ma sat Gamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.